we're going to consider what is the real reason that people don't want to work anymore. Because we see many people across many different demographics, they're getting sick of working long work hours. They're really not happy with the work environment. So let's learn a bit more about that and different people's perspective.
You're going to deal with people at your job. You're going to have coworkers who are there just to cause drama. You got the coworkers that think they're the boss. You got coworkers that are manipulative. They gossip. They talk about you. They talk about other people to you. So when you're not around, they talk about you to other people. You know, the list goes on. I had to put it in my mind that I was not at work to have friends. Even though play-along culture in work can oftentimes feel fake, it didn't feel the same as when I didn't have money. When I was struggling, that feeling that I had was far greater than the feeling of dealing with people at work that I don't necessarily like or don't like me. I was there for the money. And if you can find yourself feeling like your job doesn't align with your values, you have to make sure it's not internal. You're at a job for money. You're using that money to do things outside of your job that's more beneficial for your life than what's going on at the job. The people that just coincidentally, you can't control that, they just so happen to work at the job alongside you. They're your co-workers. You can only decide what you do to put yourself in a position to get hired. You're not there to decide who else gets hired to work in the same work environment that you work in. So it's certain things you have to think about.
So there's a couple important lessons we can learn here, right? Firstly, people think, oh, why doesn't everyone want to work anymore? It's because they're lazy. It's because they're the Zoomers, Gen Z are lazy, or that people don't have the motivation because they want everything easy, or there's all sorts of reasons and excuses people come up with, but there's lots of valid reasons why people don't want to work anymore. And point number one here is toxic co-workers, right? You deal with a lot more toxic co-workers than in the past. A lot of people are unhappy in their life and they project that on their co-workers at work, creating a toxic, negative work environment. They like the petty high school gossip. The workplace environment is kind of feminized. There's a lot of like jealousy, pettiness. It's like that high school drama, Mean Girls with Lindsay Lohan. Sometimes you're at work and it feels like a high school playground rather than actual being able to do the work. And the whole theme of like co-workers not being your friends is very real when you deal with a lot of these fake people. For example, I remember working at a major investment bank. If you're brand new to the channel, I've worked for over 10 years in investment banking, sales and trading type of roles across some of these major banks. And one story that comes to mind would be a co-worker who was on our team and he was in a long-term relationship with a woman on another team. And they didn't discuss their personal life too much at work, but you might hear little details that they might mention. And I wouldn't delve into their personal life. I didn't really want to get into it. But there'd be like co-workers who'd be extra friendly with either of them and kind of be a bit more social with them and know a bit more about their personal life. And anytime that male employee would have a day off work, all his co-workers who'd pretend to be his friends would joke about him, that his wife is kind of walking all over him, that his wife wears the trousers in the relationship, and that he's a bit of a pushover guy and she's ruling over him and things like that. They'd basically mock him, right? And I remember thinking, like, I treat this co-worker like, you know, kind of in a professional way. I don't know too much about his personal life. I'm not going to get into it. But all these guys will pretend to be his friend and go for work drinks with him after work and hang out with him and go to music concerts. And it's like they're all mocking him openly on his one day off because he didn't take a lot of days off. This is what the workplace environment is, and you should bear in mind any little detail you share. I've seen many instances like that where you take one day off as a employee, and then other co-workers are kind of, you know, gossiping about you or mocking you behind your back. So be really careful what you say. Even if you're dealing with a stressful scenario outside of work, you might discuss it with one co-worker, and on your day off or when you're not there, everyone else knows your business because they got nothing else to talk about, right? So again, co-workers are not your friends. You're dealing with a lot of toxic co-workers. And there is some truth to what he's saying. You know, just for the sake of earning your income, you have to get along to play along. You have to play along to get along, however you want to word it. You just got to go along with the scenario. And it's very important you do see your job as, you know, this is an income source. It's not about whether you like the people or not. And one of the most annoying things about a job is that you have to pretend to like your co-workers. You can't just be professional and serious. You have to be professional and friendly. And it's just like a lot of the petty small talk is just it's become so necessary, even if you can't stand the people you're working with. And then again, when he talks about putting the money first, that's what you should always be thinking. That's the only thing that keeps me motivated. Let's say your co-workers are not your friends, and some people, they really fool themselves that their co-workers care about them and they're all buddy, as I say, going for work drinks, talking talking about their similar interests. Your co-worker will stab you in the back at a moment's notice in front of the manager to gain some leverage with you in a high stakes meeting. And I've seen stuff like that also on trading floors and things like that. To put your money first, you're emotionally detached from everyone, and then you can just move forward best on the best basis on your life doing that, right? And then also, as I say, you got to have like kind of thick skin in terms of the gossip. I remember dealing with like some co-workers who would constantly try to delve into my personal life, and I just wouldn't discuss it with them, and they started being really pushy about it, and they didn't respect my boundaries. And I wasn't even that strict with it. It's just like, I'm not going to discuss the ins and outs of my personal life with a co-worker, even if they keep pushing that basis. And if you make a joke about them or ask them about their personal life, they might get defensive, but they want to know everything about you. It's really this type of petty co-worker nonsense that you have to tolerate. But sometimes if you're really dealing with that toxic drama environment, then that you really might be in a scenario where you will essentially kind of end up being in a situation where you just don't want to work anymore. You'd rather be unemployed or being in a completely different work environment, given some of the co-workers. And the whole point of keeping motivated is you want the money to invest for your freedom for the future. And essentially you need to convert that money into freedom. So you take the money from the job you hate to live a life that you actually love living. And it's all about being self-motivated from that perspective. And that's how you can get through a job that you don't essentially want to work anymore. And it can be really difficult. I think that saving and investing really reduces the pressure, because you realize that essentially you're preparing for your escape plan. Even if you're pretending at work that you're really working hard for the promotion, even if you're really not. The whole goal is to kind of play along with the BS corporate drama, corporate politics, and fake friendships just for the sake of your escape plan. And that's something I really encourage that you all do if you're really in a situation where you don't want to work anymore, as difficult as it might be. Now, next up, we're going to listen to a woman who's saying she can't handle the 9-to-5 life anymore. So let's see what she's going through. Right, so we've got another strong girl boss here, so hopefully she's got some answers for us.
I know I'm probably just being so dramatic and annoying, but this is my first job, my first 9-to-5 job after college, and I'm in person, and I'm commuting in the city, and it takes me fucking forever to get there. There's no way I'm gonna be able to afford living in the city right now, so that's off the table. Like, fucking duh! If I was able to walk to work, and it'd be fine, but I'm not. So it literally takes me, like, I leave here, I get on the train at 7:30, and I don't get home till, like, 6:15 earliest, and then, like, I don't have time to do anything.
So firstly, right, so again, as I pointed out in some of my recent videos, did women not realize that work was like this for most men? It's like a very little free time. A lot of your life revolves around work. And again, this is another reason, to be fair, why people don't want to work anymore, right? And it really shows the difference between working remotely versus working in the office. And a quick point she made there about living near the office. So I'd encourage everyone, depending on your budget, if you can do anything to save time throughout the week so you can focus on your side hustle, focus on your personal life, whether that's working remotely, getting some hybrid work, so maybe you can work less in the office, work more from home. If possible, living closer to the office, or if you try to do any scenario that would work for you. So for example, say you have to be in the head office, but it's relatively far from where you live, you can maybe ask, can you work in a more smaller local office that they might have in your local neighborhood? In some cases that does exist. So for example, some major investment banks, they have offices in Canary Wharf, which would be central London, but they have smaller offices on the outskirts of London that they don't really discuss or disclose publicly. It's like their backup offices, and sometimes some employees who have a bit of leverage or their favoritism with the management, they manage to work a few days in those offices or a few days work from home, even though technically you might not be allowed, because they get that kind of leverage and flexibility of getting the management buy-in. So anything you can do to save time, living near the office, working at a smaller office, so you have less time commuting, will really help. So that's a small little clip that we've got from the first point here. And then working in the office is completely pointless. Whole RTO, return to the office, is pointless. It's something that's been encouraged by middle management because they want to, essentially rule over the more junior employees. A lot of middle management can be completely removed or greatly reduced. Typically, you'd have so many middle-aged people in middle management, and I'm not knocking them, but So many of them are unnecessary. They spend half their time chit-chatting on work calls, not actually needing to supervise people. Sometimes you've got people in their 40s supervising people in their 30s, and the people in their 30s really know what they're doing. They don't need someone who's slightly more experienced than them to boss them around and control how they speak and how they move and give them pointless career advice and consider that's a reason why they get double the salary of the guy in their 30s. I've seen this type of scenario a lot. And then there's a lot of women I know who do live in the city, and they live this kind of comfy life. They have an easy corporate job that's quite highly paid. They spend a lot of time being consumers, as in like buying a lot of expensive clothing, going to expensive restaurants and things like that. So a lot of people don't want to work anymore because they just want to be consumers. And I think that's a fair point to make. I don't think the fact that we say people don't want to work anymore is just because of the inflation and the difficult economy and job stability. There is a significant proportion of people who are just kind of lazy, and they've just fully been brainwashed by the consumerism and materialism mindset. They just want to buy some fancy things and then live kind of, buy their Starbucks coffee every day and eat out at a restaurant every night, things like that. And they might have like a boyfriend or a husband who will pick up the bills and pay for the rent and pay for them to live this kind of lavish, comfortable life. I've seen this type of dynamic where you might have a woman like this and a man who'd be significantly older, maybe in his late 30s, early 40s, and he'd be picking up the bill for everything that she wants, and she lives quite a comfortable life. So, it's an interesting dynamic why people don't want to work anymore, depending on their particular socioeconomic scenario.
I want to shower, eat my dinner, and go to sleep. I don't have time or energy to cook my dinner either. I don't have energy to work out. That's out the window. I'm so upset. Oh my God. Nothing to do with my job at all, but just like the 9-to-5 schedule in general is crazy. Being in the office 9 to 5, like if it was remote, you get off at 5 and you're home and everything's fine. But like I'm not home. It takes me long to get home, and like people that drive to the office, like you don't get off at 5. And I know it could be worse. I know I could be working longer, but like I literally get off, it's pitch black. I don't have energy. How do you have friends? Like how do you have time to like meet like a guy? I don't know. Like how do you have time for like dating? Like, I don't have time for anything, and I'm like so stressed out. And I'm also getting my period, so that's why I'm all emotional.
So we're kind of done with listening to the whinge fest, to be honest, but this is what I wanted to mention here, which she does mention, which is a fair point, is the second order effects. Now, what are the second order effects? That would be people are so short of time, they don't have time to take care of their health, whether it's, working out regularly, whether it's making their own food, or they have to pay for an expensive maybe meal prep service, or they buy fast food because they're short of time. As I say, they don't have time for their fitness and working out, maybe because they're tired from their day job. So the kind of the fourth point I wanted to make beyond that would be the 9 to 5 is kind of a scam, right? So we went through some other points, like the first thing was the toxic co-workers. Second thing is people looking for an escape plan. Third thing would be, kind of people want to be consumers. And then fourthly, 9 to 5 being a scam, right? It's designed to make you sick, depressed, and broke, right? This system wants to make you sick because whether it's through the intense lifestyle, through the unhealthy food, wants to make you depressed, so you spend money on the big pharmaceutical pills for your mental health, or you pick up bad habits, you spend time watching Netflix, getting Uber Eats, things like that. And the truth is, all office jobs can be remote, and that's a key indication that the 9 to 5 is a scam, because all jobs can be done remotely. Everyone in the world basically had to work remotely for several years during the lockdown, complete hoax BS. So everyone had to work from home. So your manager worked from home, your manager managed you while they were working from home, you worked from home, everyone got their job done. Some companies had record profits, some big banks, financial firms had record profits, record bonuses, all while people were working from home. But they can't seem to justify that in terms of giving you the benefit of working from home. It's only when it benefits the company or there's some globalist propaganda, right, that needs you to work from home. You can never have any worker rights. And that really does say something about the last few years, that you could have had workers unite who were working from home, who had office jobs, and through labor unions and things like that actively advocate for themselves to essentially have the right to work from home. But again, people don't unite because we have this kind of individualistic society where people are out for themselves. So even if 50% of people say we're starting a campaign to work from home, the other 50% will be so eager to work in the office and play the corporate mind games and drink the corporate Kool-Aid. So it's very important to consider all of that, right? So All office jobs can be remote. The 9 to 5 is a scam. Many people have mental breakdowns in the workplace environment, and you might not know about it. I've had conversations with psychiatrists and things like that, and they said many people in the finance industry take SSRIs, Lexapro, and things like that, which are basically antidepressants and things, and different substances to get through the day, because the workplace environment is very toxic, right? And it keeps you in an environment that you feel kind of unwelcome or threatened or paranoid about, because you can't trust your co-workers. There's so much gossiping and backstabbing going on. Now, when you see someone like this who's basically having a mental breakdown in a video, even though maybe it's an emotional moment, there's many things that are pointing towards the inevitable collapse of Western civilization and this type of work environment. If you have intense workplace practices, intense work culture across the West, workism, if you look up the term workism, ISM, work ISM, like racism, you have workism. Workism is like this kind of culture of just working without any real substance. That's what you kind of have in the West, particularly in like corporate America jobs and things like that. It's all pointing to an inevitable sign of collapse. There's a lack of community, family, relationships, dating, time for friendships. Just consume and stay at home or commute to work. So you're either like, as I say, commuting to work at your workplace, or you're at home and you're consuming, right? Maybe playing video games, Netflix, getting fast food, things like that. And I'm not saying all of things are bad or people shouldn't be able to live their life and have fun and do whatever they want. But there's no glue holding people together. So typically in a workplace environment, maybe several decades ago, you might have people from similar backgrounds, similar interests, similar humor styles, and similar banter and things like that. And they'd get on well with people in the office because you're around the same culture or the same kind of behavioral patterns. Now everything's so divisive between men and women, right wing and left wing, different races. There's all these tensions going on in society right now. So it's not even like, you go to work and it feels like a kind of friendly environment or an environment you kind of enjoy, don't mind being in a sense. Now it's like you go to work and everything's on edge, right? How you have social interactions and things like that. So, and essentially there's no third place. And some of you might have seen my community tab. Check out my community tab on my YouTube channel with some interesting polls and different posts and things that people are enjoying there. I mentioned the concept of third place. Third place is somewhere where people will hang out, not their house, not their workplace, somewhere people would hang out. Now, a lot of those places are either kind of overpriced or just not an environment you want to be in. Typically, it'd be like a coffee shop, a nightclub, a bar. You see some of these things kind of falling away because people aren't socializing as much in public. So you have these type of broken dynamics. Now, you're going to have an entire generation of women like her and men who are going to have these mental breakdowns. They're basically working like a slave and not getting anything out of this system. Now we're going to move on to a few extra clips about what a different demographics. We went through a black person, a white woman, and let's listen to a white guy talk about his experiences. I'm Asian from ethnically Indian background, so let's listen to his perspective on why people are unhappy about working.
Feasible reality for most people. In fact, most people who are graduating from college now are finding out a very tough reality. They racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans. They're now paying interest rates, probably 8% or more, and they'll realistically never pay the student loan off. And then they enter into the workplace and they have pitched this idea that, hey, if you work hard, you get this degree, you're going to have a great career path. And half of them can't even find a job. Apply to hundreds of positions and not get any responses. And if they do get a response, it's for a job that realistically doesn't even require a college degree, or it's at a fraction of the amount of money that they probably should be making on the open market to justify the cost of the degree that they just got. And so it's no wonder that a lot of people who enter into the workplace are very jaded by this. Back in the day, you didn't necessarily need these expensive college degrees to get well-paying jobs where you could go off and do all these things like buying.
So this is another point, right? And this is point 6. So point 5, which I covered earlier, with the inevitable collapse of community and society. Point 6 is around student debt. So many people are getting scammed, right? So many elements of the system are a scam, not just a 9 to 5, but studying, getting a degree, getting into student debt. And then you don't have a stable job, you have a massive amount of debt to pay off, and sometimes the debt, depending how it's structured, it could be linked to the current rate of inflation, it could have an increasing interest rate, depending on the interest rate in your country, so it can be really difficult to pay this off, right? Particularly when it is linked to the rate of inflation, which has gone up significantly in recent years. So all these things are a scam, really do put pressure on you, and then a lot of people, they don't want to face the reality that having a degree is really completely unnecessary for most jobs, right? Most jobs you could do with a a college education or a high school education, and you can learn everything else on the job. But in order to get some of these jobs, you need to have the kind of social status and the connections. And if you don't have that, you have to go to a top university. Now, I studied hard to go to a top university and get a position there at LSE, which is London School of Economics, which is a bit like Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, MIT, and I got a degree in economic history and economics and things like that. But that will open the door for me to be able to get a job in investment banking and sales and trading and things like that, because I didn't have the connections or the network. And sometimes you see people who have those high status degrees from these top unis, Harvard, MIT, working at Goldman Sachs and things like that. But sometimes you have people who don't, and they're not particularly smart, and they just had the right connections. So their father was a hedge fund manager and they managed to get a job at Goldman Sachs working in the hedge fund sales team, things like that. So all sorts of things can impact that. And lots of people are like, oh, hold on, you studied a really complicated university degree, it didn't really help your job prospects, and you're in a lot of debt, you're not making a lot of money. So that's another reason why people don't want to work anymore, right? So degrees are effectively a social status signal to get certain jobs. It's credentialism. You might have heard the term credentialism, which is essentially a lot of times you have to do a particular degree at a particular top university, even if what you're learning isn't that relevant to the job, just to signal as a social status signal, like buying a nice car or the latest phone, to say you're in the in crowd and you have the relevant degree to get the job, rather than actually having relevant skills. And that's the thing, these entry-level jobs, they don't pay well. These jobs aren't stable either. So it's like a lot of people getting into a lot of debt to be in a really unstable situation. And they're learning things at these expensive university degrees that you can typically learn online for free. And it just doesn't make sense, right? People are really losing hope because the system being a scam is just too obvious to avoid.
Rectifying. People can't seem to get traction. They get laid off repeatedly, and every time they climb out of the hole, somebody kicks them back down in it through another layoff, or employers acting so poorly. You've seen stories of people who have accepted positions and they quit a job, or they finally get off the unemployment line and they go to start their first day only to find out that their offer's been rescinded before they've even started. And it puts people into a really difficult position. And we're supposed to put this face on that this is okay, that we're happy to be here and that we're happy to interview for your job, when we know that you just laid off, and the wage that you're paying is 20 or 30% below market. So how can we put on a happy face to these people when we are being screwed left and right? And
so this is important, right? The layoffs never seem to end. In 2020, there were some layoffs because, there were lockdowns and some jobs were considered non-essential. Then in 2022, I noticed there were some layoffs on the 2022, 2023, depending how you look at it. Some layoffs in tech and finance, as some of these companies weren't doing as well as previous years and they wanted to get rid of some of the staff. And then also there's more layoffs this year and there will be more layoffs next year, right? And you can see it's due to AI, automation, jobs being outsourced, potential recession, things like that. But the human element of that is sometimes overlooked because people look at the macro level of what are the unemployment numbers, what is the economic growth, what's the interest rate, blah. But they don't think about how the system is continually kicking people in the face while they're down, while they're dealing with that high level of inflation, working hard and then getting your job offer rescinded and removed. People can't pretend to be happy when they see such an obviously rigged system. And for example, I remember during the time when inflation was really going up about 2 years ago, I work in the finance sector and I had a conversation with my two managers and I said, my pay is not in line with inflation. We work in finance. We know the rate of inflation is particularly high. We know it's going to go up a lot more. We know the real rate of inflation in terms of basic food costs and things like that, around 30%. It's not the 10% the government's saying. And I know my managers are getting paid like 4 or 5 times my salary. And I asked for like a basic pay rise that was somewhat in line. And I didn't think it'd be in line with the 10% rate of inflation. I thought at that point maybe they could do 2 to 5% or something like that. And the manager kind of laughed it off, particularly when I said, central banks aren't being particularly honest about the rate of inflation, because the banking industry is a bunch of people who are on the in group of the scam. They know it's a scam. They know when a country, let's just say in Eastern Europe, gets blamed for the rate of inflation, it's nothing to do with that. The main cause for the rate of inflation is central banks printing money out of thin air and calling it QE, right? Calling it quantitative easing. It's not the blame of a conflict in Eastern Europe as much as that big country in Eastern Europe gets blamed for everything, right? The point I'm making is that the manager kind of laughed it off. They weren't even laughing at me. They were laughing at the fact that we all know the inflation numbers are faked. Yeah, everyone who works in finance, I'm sure many of you who don't, the statistics are fake, basically, right? And I was asking for a basic pay rise because at that point they tried to say my performance wasn't good. They weren't giving me a pay rise even though I was doing my manager's job, and she quit because she got fed up with the management themselves be above her. So the point I'm making is the system is just screwing you over with layoffs, a lack of pay rises, managers who get paid 4 or 5 times your salary, not giving you a basic pay rise when they easily could negotiate that, given other people are getting bonuses. And it's socially taxing. One thing people don't seem to understand, and I'm just speaking on my experience here, hopefully no one gets too sensitive about this, but a lot of people in these senior like finance roles, some senior corporate roles, they're middle-aged white people, and they're middle-aged white people, but a specific demographic of that, liberals, the soy boy, bug man, girl boss, girl power, feminist type, right? 40-something-year-old people. Those are typically the people of the management that you'll have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure there's people more senior than that in the finance industry, from a particular tribe and things like that, which we won't get into here, who are in major positions of power of finance, Hollywood, media and things like that. But the majority of people you have to deal with on a regular basis is the middle-aged white liberal or feminist, right? And they don't understand how socially taxing it can be to be in that environment for other races. I could imagine if you're an Asian man like myself, a black man, maybe a black woman, other demographics, Asian woman, maybe from a Hispanic background. When you're in the corporate environment, it doesn't feel like a comfortable environment. And I realize a lot of middle-aged white people, they don't pick up on that because it's just what they think is the normal corporate environment is very tailored to their sensibilities and sense of humor and banter and things like that. And if you're not coming from that background, you might feel a bit uncomfortable there. Like it's not clear like what joke can you make, what joke can't you make, what could be interpreted as misogynist or inappropriate, because we all have different cultures and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And it's very socially taxing to be in that environment, and you feel like you're getting screwed over because you're kind of miserable. But there's a certain demographic of middle-aged white people who kind of have the whole workplace environment tailored to their personality types. And then you have these kind of, like I say in many of my videos, this kind of demeaning anti-male culture where men can be mocked but women can't be mocked. You can make jokes about men but not women. So there's all these type of double standards you constantly have to tolerate that wears on you every day. So not only are you getting screwed economically, you're getting screwed socially too. And also you see, despite these companies having record rates of inflation, record rates of profits, and they have greedflation where sometimes they're raising prices where it's hard to link that to the rate of inflation. They just want to make more money, and you're not getting any increases in your salary or anything. So it's like, how can you kind of justify the fact that companies are pretending they can't give you a small pay rise when they're making record profits? And the income disparity that you hear about on the news, the decline in the middle class, there's the rich and the poor and things like that. Those income disparities are becoming more and more apparent in the work environment. So as I say, someone over 40 who managed to save and invest a lot because the economy was doing better before and they didn't deal with this rate of inflation. So they're kind of comfortable. They're living an easy life. But if you're more junior, maybe in your early 30s, in your 20s, you're struggling even to like maybe do basic grocery shopping, to even save up money to buy your first small property. You're seeing that income disparity and how easy a life that someone in their 40s has it, because they came from a generation where this economy was rigged in favor of the middle class. Now it's rigged anti-male or anti against the middle class, So you have to deal with all these income disparities and BS in the workplace environment and pretend like it's normal and it's fine when it's actually not.
What matters is people do want to work if there's something worth working toward. The idea of working a long-term career with a single employer is gone. The idea of affording a reasonable house to raise a family and to have reasonable things in your house and to be able to take vacations, etc., is gone. The idea of ever having affordable education that actually pays off in the end is gone. The idea of ever having an automobile to get to and from work seems to be gone. The idea that we are probably heading towards you'll own nothing and be happy seems to be what's happening now. So you'll have to forgive me when I call out your BS when you say that people don't want to work, because the reality is people do want to work, but they want it to be fair. Okay.
So there we go, right? If people can't afford the basics, it makes sense why they don't want to work anymore, right? If you're maybe more on the younger end, you might be thinking, oh, one day, I'll work out, the economy will get better, job stability will get better, then I get married and have a family and buy some nice houses or one or two houses. These things are deliberately becoming more difficult to do, and I'd encourage you to really think realistically before you do make a big decision like buying an expensive house and getting a massive mortgage, or getting married and having kids. Can you really afford that in the long term? Do you have the stability there? Because I think in most cases, even though it's a difficult conversation to have, you might not want to have kids, you might not want to get married, you might not want to buy a house, you might want to buy a small 1-bedroom apartment, 2-bedroom apartment, and maybe think, okay, cool, let's take it step by step. Let's not jump and dive into like an expensive wedding, expensive house, have 2 kids back to back. Think about it step by step, because this system is very unstable for everyone, really, unless you're super wealthy. You really need to navigate that carefully, right? And if you can't afford the basics, many people are not going to bother to work hard. They're going to think, okay, cool, if you can't take that step up to maybe get married and have kids, why don't I take the step down and become a minimalist, right? So rather than buying the big 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, maybe I'll buy a 1-bedroom apartment. Maybe I'll take all the money I would have saved, I would have spent on a wife, on a wedding, on kids, and invest all of that aggressively so I can retire early and live a basic minimalist life. There's all those jokes I'm sure some of you have seen, some of the men have seen, about Reddit male spaces, which are or Reddit males living spaces, where a man can really live his life like a minimalist, right? You could have a mattress on the floor, you could have a deck chair and a big screen TV to play video games. And that's all you kind of need. Now, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I know myself, I live quite a minimalist life. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. I don't have a lot of high expenses. I don't plan on increasing any of my expenses dramatically. I might buy 1 or 2 pieces of furniture, and I might also invest quite aggressively, right? But I'm not going to be planning on buying any big unnecessary social status purchases. So this is what the system doesn't seem to get. People are going to adapt to it. If you're going to say you'll own nothing and be happy, people are going to be like, okay, well, maybe I'll own nothing and I'll be happy, but I'll retire early. Because people are going to find a way of screwing the system that's trying to screw them over by putting in less work. Now, as I say, people will become a minimalist in the sense they'll enjoy nature, enjoy the free aspects of life, going to parks and things like that, and doing less work. And they'll screw the system that's trying to screw them. So that's how it works. And this is actually already happening in Asia, in countries like Korea and Japan, parts of China too. There's this culture of laying flat, which is a response from most people in their 20s and 30s. You can look up the term laying flat, in response to their workplace culture, which is even more intense than the West, that wants them to work, like I say, 6 days a week for 9 hours a day or more, and get all these high performance targets they have to meet. Lots of people are laying flat. They're opting for easier jobs. They're doing less work. They're dropping out the social status game. They're deciding not to have kids. You can look at South Korea's reproduction rate. People just had enough. They just don't want to continue with this society as it is. And that's where the West is heading. Men dropping out of society, people dropping out the social status game, people deciding not to have kids. And these are all deliberate, WEF agendas. Lower your living standards, lower the birth rate. These are not like surprise things that occurred out of nowhere due to toxic masculinity or whatever. These are all planned agendas to push people in certain directions. But even though you're dealing with those kind of rigged circumstances at a globalist level, you can kind of adapt to make it work for you. So it makes sense why people are desperate and they hate their job. So I hope you got some useful insight, because I think that's a really thorough take on why people essentially don't want to work their jobs, right? They want more time freedom. They want more ability to kind of pursue other things if that's not going to be having a family and having kids. In terms of career advice, if you want a way to navigate people not wanting to work anymore, early retirement, navigating yourself through these toxic work environments where you don't have a lot of leverage, I do have career advice that I could provide to you. The link's in description. We can speak directly and I can give you some personalized coaching. So what needs to be taught really is honest assessment of what's going on maybe in your career or just broader in the workplace. And that's something we can discuss, as I say, in one-to-one sessions, rather than having a corporate mentor that's going to lie to you and tell you to work harder, tell you to maybe suck up to management and things like that. And what you really need in this type of society right now is a lot of power, a lot of knowledge, because that knowledge will give you the power to strategize effectively and know what you're up against. And that's why these type of real conversations are very important to help you. So I hope you find that helpful. There are 2 recommended videos on your screen right now, and I'll see you next time.